The Retire Your Ride program is an initiative of the Government of Canada and the Clean Air Foundation and is supported by the Auto Recyclers of Canada. The program is designed to remove high-polluting cars from the road and reward the owners of those cars for doing so. The Retire Your Ride program is designed to responsibly recycle 1995 and older vehicles. Approximately 50,000 vehicles will be retired annually across Canada until 2011. And that's where you come in. Auto recyclers are partners in pollution prevention.
In the second module, we'll be talking more specifically about the types of hazardous materials we're dealing with when we recycle end-of-life vehicles. Hazardous materials are banned from landfills and would contaminate soils and water bodies if released into the environment. Because even small volumes of hazardous materials can pollute the environment, all vehicles to be recycled must first be decontaminated. The careful and safe management of hazardous materials is one of the most vital responsibilities in automotive recycling.
Auto recyclers play a vital role in the recycling of materials from vehicles. And I find, having worked with you guys for the last 10, 12 years, is this point is missed far too often. You're considered junkyards, and that's not appropriate. We want to reuse parts. We want to recycle materials. And we need this industry.
Did you know that 1 gallon of used oil can contaminate 1 million gallons of water? When properly recycled, motor oil can be reprocessed and used in furnaces for heat or in power plants to generate electricity for homes, schools, and businesses. Fuel lubricants and antifreeze are toxic to our water and soil if they are released into the environment. Antifreeze, transmission fluid, power steering fluid, and gear oil can all be recycled. The main ingredient in antifreeze is ethylene glycol, which is derived from natural gas, which can be distilled and filtered to almost new condition. Anti-rust, anti-leak, and detergent additives can then be added to make new antifreeze again. Refrigerants are used in automobile air conditioners.
We got two types, R12 and HFC 134A. R12 was banned, I believe, in 1996 in Canada, so it hasn't been used since that date. Hopefully it's been replaced prior to that. R12 is a nasty, nasty compound. Okay, this is the ozone depleting compound that when released to the environment has an impact on the ozone. The other aspect that I think people forget is it's also a very powerful greenhouse gas. So for every kilo of R12 that's released from your site, it's equivalent to approximately 10,000 kilos of carbon dioxide. So that's 10 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. Okay, so how much R12 would be in a typical car if you had one? A couple pounds? Okay, so a kilo. So if you don't process it properly, you're contributing approximately 10 tons of CO2 equivalent to the atmosphere, plus all the ozone depleting impacts. So we forget that it's a very powerful greenhouse gas. And the cars that we're focusing on are 1996 and older, where we would expect maybe 10, 15% might have R12, if they have anything at all, something along those lines. So we're targeting in this program cars that may have R12. Very, very important. Now, HFC 134A is the product that substituted for the R12, and you'll see it in late model cars. The good news is that HFC is not an ozone depleting substance, so that's a good thing. It's also a greenhouse gas. Approximately 1 kilogram of HFC 134A is equivalent to about 1,300 kilos of CO2 equivalent, so 1.3 tons. So better than R12, but still important to capture. Now again, when we go through the code of practice, refrigerants are the most regulated product that we have in our list because of the potential impacts to the environment. So don't skimp on how you process refrigerants. And we'll go through what the code says around that. But just keep that in the back of your mind.
Mercury is a toxic metal often used in switches to activate convenience lighting in the hood or trunk of a car.
Mercury is ubiquitous in the environment, but in the mercury switches, a small amount can contaminate a lot. This has 0.85 of a gram of mercury, and apparently This, if we released it into a 20-acre lake or a 10-hectare lake or 8-hectare lake, it would contaminate the fish for 1 year, and you couldn't eat the fish. So that shows you how toxic it potentially can be. So just be careful when you recover the mercury pellets, and make sure that you don't break the aluminum housing that it's in, and that you store them and send them off to the switch-out program or equivalent program, because I believe Saskatchewan has their own program, is that correct? But in Ontario here, we have the mercury switch-out program, which started here, so support it and send it off to the Clean Air Foundation, and they will dispose of the mercury in an appropriate manner. Lead, 2 or 3 sources of lead. Obviously, we got the lead acid batteries, but we also have the lead in on the tire rims and on the battery cables. So just take them off. Hopefully you can sell it. I think everybody will buy lead these days because it's an important commodity.
By now, most people are familiar with the serious toxic effects of lead exposure on human health that prompted the removal of lead from paint and fuel products. Automobiles are now the #1 source of lead pollution in North America. Lead is a valuable raw material that can be recycled. Acid can be separated from batteries prior to smelting, filtered, and then passed on to specialized recycling companies. Millions of tires from cars and trucks are thrown away every year, and we've all seen the sickening images on the news of toxic fires burning for days, causing the evacuation and contamination of communities. Discarded tires can also hold water and act as breeding grounds for mosquitoes and rodents, promoting the spread of disease. 20 years ago, the market for scrap tires barely existed. Now, tires can be retread and tire parts can be recycled and used in everything from the bottoms of sandals to speed bumps and rubber-modified asphalt for roads and athletic tracks. Windshield washer fluid contains the poison ethylene glycol and is toxic and flammable. Proper recycling of windshield washer fluid prevents soil and water contamination.
There are 2 legal aspects associated with the management of hazardous materials. The first is contamination on a site. Every province in Canada has contaminated sites legislation, and vehicle dismantlers are responsible for the remediation and cleanup of spills and contamination left on a site.
The second legal aspect is when the hazardous materials leave your property under controlled or uncontrolled circumstances. Runoff during precipitation events and snowmelt can transport hazardous materials to streams and sewers and is regulated. If your site is located next to a fish-bearing stream in a high precipitation area, then you are a high-risk site, and the control of runoff is an important concern. If your site is in a low precipitation area with no streams nearby, then your site is a low-risk site.
The other aspect that the code will talk about are transport licenses for transporters. Remember, under the transportation of dangerous goods, it has where the shipment originates, who's transporting it, and where it's going. So you have a responsibility to make sure that the person who's transporting those things is licensed. And why is it important to use a licensed transporter? Well, for one, they're insured. They dump their load of batteries on the 401, their insurance is going to cover it. They're licensed to do it. They're also bonded. So they put up a bond to the Ministry of Environment. So if they dump a load of batteries in the Don Valley River, they're going to get it cleaned up. You don't have a headache. There's 3 key things you got to do. You got to make sure you know what is a waste and what is a product. You have to remember that it's illegal to discharge those wastes to the environment, and that you need to manage those wastes in normal and emergency conditions. And that includes document and records management, registration potentially with regulatory agencies, storage, transportation, and reporting. And if you take that message away, then you read through the Code of Practice and you assess your yard to the Code of Practice, you're good to go. In this module, I'm going to walk you through the inspection process of a recycling facility. There are 7 sections that we normally cover. The receiving area, dismantling area, hulk storage and crusher areas, wet parts storage, hazardous materials management, equipment and infrastructure, and administration. In each of the areas, I'll try to point out the key elements of the environmental code of practice and show you how it applies in the real-world situation. Then you'll be able to evaluate your own yard and prepare for an inspection. Here we are in the end-of-life vehicles receiving area. As you can see, this is where the vehicles are dropped when they are brought in from the tow truck or the flat deck. And this is where spills can occur. Obviously, no dismantling can occur in this area because it needs to wait until it goes into the dismantling shop. The kind of things that you want to look for here are there any spills on the ground? And most importantly, are there any drip pans around or absorbent pads to either prevent spills and leaks or to clean them up? So here we are in the dismantling area. Code of practice requires that the dismantling area be a little bit higher so that flooding doesn't occur. It also has an impermeable floor surface so that fluids that are spilled onto the floor can't get into the groundwater. Has a grate roof, as you can see here, and it also has this grate here to prevent any spills from getting out from inside to the outside. We like to think that the dismantling area could hold a minimum of 25 liters of fluid in the event that it's spilled on the ground. All the fluids are removed in the dismantling area, such as the oil, the antifreeze, the windshield washer fluid. The batteries are taken out, the lead weights are taken off, tires are taken off, and the refrigerant is usually removed in this area. This model has a mercury switch in the trunk, and so he just has removed it. And as you can see that the mercury switch is in a little plastic relay switch, and now he'll take that out and put it in a little bottle and send it off to the mercury switch out program. So when the vehicle leaves here and goes to the Hulk storage area, there are no hazardous materials in the vehicle. So here we have an example of a great Hulk storage area. As you can see, there are no spills. The spills have either been prevented or they've been cleaned up. And we can tell that they've been prevented because all the hazardous materials have been removed. The engine's been not only drained, but it's been removed. The transmission's not only been drained, but it's been removed. The windshield washer fluid has been drained. As you can see, the refrigerant's been removed. The master cylinder's been drained. The battery's been taken off and the ends have been clipped so that there is no lead out here. And as you can see, the car has been prepped and all spills have either been prevented or cleaned up. So this car is held here until they've finished taking all the parts off, and then it goes over to the crush pile. Okay, so here we are at the crush area, and recyclers do one of three things. One is they will have a crusher on site, and they just will crush the vehicle and then have it hauled away to the steel recycler. In this yard, they have what's called a crush pile, and they'll bring in a mobile crusher, and a forklift will put the cars in the mobile crusher, and they're crushed and then taken away. Or the third option is recyclers, usually the smaller recyclers, will not have a crusher, and they'll just take the Hulk straight to the steel recycling. Now, what I like about this this crush pile is you can see that the cars are well organized. They all have had their engines taken out. There are no fluids in there. The refrigerants have all been taken out. The mercury switches have been taken out. There are no tires. There are no oil stains in the water, and so that means they've been cleaning up after the crush. Elements of the environmental code of practice is the storage of wet parts. Here we have a great example of the proper storage of wet parts. It's undercover, it's got a great containment system on the floor, and no fluids can get from here to the outside. Another thing that this area tells you is there's really no leaks on the ground, and that tells me that the wet parts here have been properly drained. So here's another reason this is a great area to store your wet parts. There's drip pans at the bottom with wood chips in there to absorb any oil, because we always know that even though they've been drained, there's always some residual fluids that have occurred. And then you can also tell that when a spill does occur, they've taken the time and effort to put some floor dry down to clean it up. It's a great example. Here's an example of some of the spill requirements in the wet storage area. Here's some floor dry. And as we all know, the leaks and spills are going to occur in this area because they have fluids in them, or they've had fluids in them. But it's always important to keep some floor dry around to clean up any spills. Keeping it neat and tidy also not only protects the environment, but it protects worker health and safety as well. As you remember, the Code of Practice requires that the engines be drained along with other wet parts. And here is a great place to store the engines because it's got a covered roof and a nice impermeable floor. And they also have provisions to catch any drips and leaks that may occur. You can also store the engines and other wet parts in the vehicle as long as the hazardous materials have been removed. Now we're at the steering racks, and again, as you can see, they're all plugged, and they have a great containment system, so no fluids from here are going to get to the outside. The other thing that's really important here is all the spills out in the walkways are cleaned up so that you're not tracking hazardous materials around the area and out to the environment. So here we are in the pressure washing area. As you can see, this is a great place to do pressure washing. The floors are all sloped in a little bit towards a holding area. All the sludge and fluids are contained within that area, and they would be disposed of as a hazardous material. The other aspect is it's inside, it's on a good concrete floor, and no fluids or overspray can get to the outside environment, and that will prevent spills and unnecessary cleanup. One of the important areas of the Environmental Code of Practice is the hazardous materials management. This means that hazardous materials are removed in the dismantling area, they're stored in appropriate tanks, and then disposed of as hazardous waste. So behind me we have the storage containers for oil and antifreeze. They're double-walled tanks, and they're held here until they're disposed of by a licensed transporter.
All automotive recyclers experience leaks and spills. It's part of the business. It takes time to clean up leaks and spills, and it takes money to dispose of the contaminated soils and absorbents resulting from spills. As such, automotive recyclers should train their staff and modify their operations to prevent leaks and spills, establish spill kits, policies, and procedures to deal with the inevitable leaks and spills, and develop an emergency management plan before the emergency happens. Canada is a large country, and there are several different types of emergencies that could create a risk at an automotive recycler. Vandalism, fire, worker error, flooding, earthquake, and tsunami. The first three types of emergencies are common to all automotive recyclers. Vandals can push over or puncture tanks containing hazardous fluids. Fire can create significant runoff of hazardous materials if containers fail during the fire. Air quality problems can be caused by the burning hazardous materials. Worker error includes your workers as well as contractors transporting hazardous materials generated on site. Many automotive recyclers may be subject to flooding. The location and geomorphology of the site will determine if your site is subject to flooding. Finally, earthquake and tsunami is a special concern on the West Coast. For these reasons, all hazardous waste regulations require some sort of secondary containment. Secondary containment simply provides a margin of safety to prevent the large spills of hazardous materials to the environment. Some yards are located close to rivers, lakes, aquifers, etc. A significant spill of hazardous materials in these sensitive locations will have a much greater impact. For example, some automotive recyclers are adjacent to fish-bearing streams. As such, they should consider their site to be very sensitive, and hence their emergency management plan should reflect this sensitivity. Once the automotive recycler has assessed the types of emergencies, the risk of their site, and the quantities of hazardous materials that could be spilled, they are ready to prepare an emergency management plan. The owner of the automotive recycler must know the reporting thresholds and post them.
What are the large spills? These are the spills that you really need to control. Leaks can wait, small spills can be dealt with immediately, but in large spills, there are 3 things your employees need to do right away. Okay? The first is mobilize the spill kits and supplies. I don't want to hear about people who are trying to figure out whose fault it was or whatever. There's stuff heading out the door. It's heading towards off the property. Let's deal with it and worry about the blame later. Second thing, make sure, do whatever they can to make sure the spill is prevented from leaving the property. And that's why I said make sure your spill kit is appropriate to the volume and the hazardousness of your area. Okay? We're in Medicine Hat and we've got big flat ground and nothing's going to go anywhere. You don't need the spill kit that you need if you're right next to a fish-bearing stream. Okay? Common sense. If that container goes, can I contain it? If the answer is yes, great. The third thing that they have to do is notify authorities and the owner. Okay? They need to contact you directly. Make sure that the people are mobilizing the spill kits and the supplies. But as owners, make sure their spill kits are adequate to deal with it, and B, make sure they notify you or authorities. A spill over 100 liters has to be reported. Antifreeze 5 liters, battery acid 5 liters. So you're not going to spill more than 5 liters of battery acid. Refrigerant is 10 kilos. So that's more than 1 car. So if you got a container and somebody drops the container, knocks the top off, and it's being discharged to the environment, it needs to be reported. Now, what people do is they'll complete and fill out that form, make up some copies, and get them posted around your place. Because in an emergency, you don't want your employees to go in to pull out the binder, trying to figure out which tab it's at, and do it. Let's get the signs up there, grill it into them, maybe even test them. There is no real rule of thumb. Just make it sensible and common sense.
There are 5 basic steps that must be completed for a facility to be accredited for the Retire Your Ride program. The training manual contains the inspection protocols that will be used by the environmental inspectors. Automotive recyclers are encouraged to conduct a self-assessment of their operation and make any necessary changes to conform to the Environmental Code of Practice for the Retire Your Ride program. The facilities will be inspected at no cost by an independent, experienced inspector that understands the automotive recycling business and is trained to the Environmental Code of Practice. The facility will be given some notice that an inspection will occur to ensure that the owner or manager is present during the inspection. The inspection should not take more than 2 hours. The automotive recycler will review the inspection results with the inspector, and if there are any non-compliances to the Environmental Code of Practice, the recycler and inspector will prepare a pollution prevention plan. The pollution prevention plan must adequately address the issues identified at the site by the inspector and must be signed by the recycler. The signature of the recycler means that the business is committed to address the operational issues. Approximately 25% of the automotive recyclers will be re-inspected to ensure that they are implementing the commitments outlined in the pollution prevention plan.
There are 3 scenarios for recyclers. The first is full accreditation, which means you meet the full requirements of the Code of Practice. There are no snags on your inspection, okay? It's totally okay before the inspector gets there to go through and do the inspection yourself. That demonstrates that you understand what the requirements are, and you can fix any snags before they get there. Totally okay. Normally, though, most people don't do that, and they just wait until it gets done. The second one is your conditional accreditation. There had been deficiencies, but your pollution prevention plan addressed them. Okay? You don't have to send off your pollution prevention plan to anybody to get approved, although it is a good idea to, when you come up with some of your corrective actions, so maybe you have to build a pad, okay, maybe you check with the person that did the inspection, say, hey, this is what I'm hoping to do. Does that make a lot of sense? You don't have to, but it's not a bad idea. And the third thing is not accredited. We've shown examples of some people who have significant deficiencies and they cannot be addressed in the next 12 months. We don't want them in the program. Those people are the poor recyclers, and we've seen lots of photographs of those. And we're only maybe talking about 10-15% of auto recyclers. But for the purpose of the Retire Your Ride program, we only want recyclers that can meet the code of practice under the first two categories.
The benefits of accreditation are many and have been outlined earlier in this program. The Code of Practice combined with a credible inspection program will also free up time from the regulatory agencies so that they can focus their limited time on the non-compliant recyclers. When implemented, pollution prevention strategies will reduce environmental costs associated with your business, and that will prevent costly cleanup of the facility and make your business more profitable. Environmental accreditation has helped automotive recyclers access capital, obtain mortgages, and lines of credit with banks and lending institutions. Implementation of pollution prevention practices at the facility and the regular cleanup of leaks and spills that do occur will reduce the environmental liability of the property. Most automotive recyclers own their own property, and the preservation of the property's value is a priority. The Automotive Recyclers of Canada are committed to helping automotive recyclers understand the legal requirements for your province. ARC members and Retire Your Ride participants can receive ongoing support from ARC on any environmental question and how it pertains to your operation.